This is a chart showing the record high credit card debt in the United States today. This is a chart of the soaring adjusted real estate prices in the United States today. And this is a chart showing the rapid increase in the price of consumer goods in the United States. At one point or another, you have probably heard someone talk about one of these charts or topics. And you've probably also heard how they point towards a bleak future for the world economy. But there is one thing that no one is talking about that leaves all of these other economic problems in the dust. In fact, this chart may be the scariest economic signal that we have ever seen, and yet no one is paying attention to it. This little line right here shows with almost certainty that the global economy as we know it may be coming to an end, and there isn't anything we can do about it. When you think about things that are correlated with humanity, you probably think of something like our ability to adapt, maybe our pollution output, maybe our architecture, or maybe something else. But one thing that might be correlated with humanity more than anything else is growth. Whether it's the growth of our intelligence, technology, or productivity, humanity for thousands of years has had a general upwards trajectory for many important things in relation to our society. But there's one thing that nearly always grows no matter what. One thing that has grown through every world war, every pandemic, every golden era, and every dark age. And it is also something that we base our modern economy off of today. And that thing is our population. During World War I and II, despite losing tens of millions of people worldwide, the global population still grew during those decades. In fact, going back throughout all of human history, there's only a handful of events that caused a temporary global population decline. One was the Mongolian conquest in the 1200s, which may have killed upwards of 10% of the world's population. The Black Plague in the 1300s decreased the world population by about 25%. The crisis of the 3rd century in the Roman Empire, which was a combination of a plague, hyperinflation, weather events, and foreign invasions, caused a rapid population decline in large cities like Alexandria. And at the same time that this was going on in the Roman Empire, the crisis of the Three Kingdoms in China resulted in one of the sharpest population declines in recorded history. The Three Kingdoms War saw estimates of China losing up to 60% of its population during the 3rd century alone. However, there was one event in regards to population decline that no one talks about. One that lasted for thousands of years. It was not caused by a war, not a natural disaster, not even a pandemic. This population decline came from something different. It came from a new technology and a birth of a new economy. You see, humans up until 12,000 years ago were still hunters and gatherers. We would go out into the wilderness looking to pretty much eat anything, whether it was plants or animals. But then something changed. You see, someone in Syria came up with an idea that would change humanity. Instead of going out and looking for food from plants, why don't we try to grow our own? Right in our village. And so that one person planted rye, waited for it to grow, and then voila, the domestication of plants was discovered by humanity. Now, you might assume that this technology, the domestication of plants, would have been good for humanity, as it allowed humans to have a consistent food supply and therefore would lead humans to being able to reproduce more and grow the human population over time. But that's not what happened. In fact, it may have been somewhat detrimental to humans for thousands of years. You see, immediately after humans learned how to domesticate plants, life expectancy decreased, infant mortality rose, and the average human height decreased by nearly 4 inches. Along those lines, humans began developing new diseases like iron deficiency anemia, osteoporosis, and obesity. This was largely because humans transitioned to a new type of economy and lifestyle where there were only a few types of plants available to eat. So, the domestication of plants decreased the diversity of our food, which was a negative, But the positive was that it increased the overall food supply. It also coincidentally made humans somewhat sedentary for the first time in history. And because of these things, the human population began to decline and decline and decline, and it did this for thousands of years, making this the only time in human history where the human population steadily declined for reasons outside of war or plague. However, it is worth noting some historians do think that a plague may have spread around the world at the time, and the plague may have taken advantage of the fragility of humans at the time due to our new poor diet. But regardless, this period is known as the Neolithic decline, and it took a complete reshaping of human society in order for the global population to rise once again. And well, a handful of civilizations around the year 3000 BC started rising out of the Neolithic decline, and one of those civilizations was ancient Egypt. They began diversifying their food sources by domesticating different plants and animals while also trading with nearby civilizations for different kinds of food. And they did this because they became aware that having multiple types of food was important for being a healthy human. They also started creating new technologies and came up with new ideas to help humans live longer. Some of these technologies and ideas were medicine, dentistry, and pharmacology. Lifestyles in ancient Egypt began to change where not everyone was just a farmer anymore. Some people had specialist jobs like being a member of the military or being a craftsman, a scribe, a builder, or one of many other things. And the combination of all of these variables, along with a few others, gave birth to the first great civilizations. And coincidentally or not, the beginning of the first great civilizations also coincided with the increase in human population for the first time in thousands of years. But what does this all have to do with today? Well, you see, since about 3000 BC, the growth of the human population has become so consistent that nearly every nation around the world has based its economy and investments around the idea that its population will continue to grow forever. And let's think about this. Why do economies grow? Well, there are a few reasons why. One of which is that their value of their goods and services increase. An example of this is when the price of oil increases and many of the oil-rich nations around the world get a nice bump in their GDP, despite having produced a similar amount of oil year after year. Another reason that an economy grows is that a nation is able to produce more goods and services than the year before. And this can happen in a few ways. One of which is productivity advancements like the internet or the Industrial Revolution. Essentially, producing things becomes much more efficient and therefore you're able to make more stuff despite doing the same amount of work. And there are a few other things that nations can do in order to grow an economy, like taking on foreign investments, taking on debt, amongst other things. But an extremely important way today that nations grow their economy is by increasing the amount of people in the economy. And this is essential to how the entire world economy runs right now. This is a map of the total fertility rate of each country. The blue nations are ones with a low fertility rate that have naturally declining populations. Green nations are ones that have a relatively stable population, some of which may be growing and some of which may be shrinking, but it's nothing crazy. The red, yellow, and purple nations all have a naturally high fertility rate, therefore are naturally growing populations. But when you remove the word naturally and just look at the total population growth of each country, you get this map. You see here that many of the nations around the world that are supposed to be shrinking and declining in population have actually slightly increased in population. And that is largely because of immigration. Nations with shrinking domestic populations have begun ramping up immigration from other countries with high birth rates in order to sustain economic growth for the country. One example of this is Canada, who recently announced to double its annual immigration in order to bring in more adults into its workforce. And it is doing this despite having a healthcare system that is showing signs of collapse, it is the most unaffordable housing market in the developed world, and its infrastructure may not even be able to support an influx of immigrants. So then why is a country like Canada doing this and doubling its immigration? Well, there are a few reasons. You see, when a population declines, a few things tend to happen. One of which is that recessions can happen a lot more often, or in some circumstances be constant, meaning that a nation will essentially be in a perpetual state of economic decline in some cases. Another thing that tends to happen as the population declines is that the population also ages, meaning that the workforce has a lot more pressure on it to support the older population who is not working. Things like government programs, whether it's healthcare, infrastructure, education, or many other high-cost programs, tend to either go through a significant cut or reduction because there are less people available in the workforce to pay into those programs. Unemployment also tends to remain high in these nations as well, which also contributes to the downwards spiraling of the economy. On top of that, a nation's trading power, military strength, and importance on the world stage tend to also decrease when a population decline happens. In a sense, a population decline can lead to a litany of problems that could make a country either irrelevant or collapse from the inside over the long term. And that's why Canada is trying to ramp up immigration, in order to hold off on any of these problems. But that brings up a question. What happens when the human population peaks, as it is supposed to by the end of this century? What happens when there's no country in the world with a growing population? And all of the nations who relied upon immigration may all of a sudden not have any immigrants to keep their economy running. Well, we will enter a time when it's very possible that every single nation in the world will go through a population decline at the same time, meaning that, based on our current system, we could enter a perpetual global recession forever. The population will keep declining, and the economy will keep spiraling downwards. Essentially, we will be entering our own version of the Neolithic decline that has not been seen for over 5,000 years. But there are a few countries that might be in the perfect spot to take advantage of this situation. In fact, the same country that helped stop the Neolithic decline may once rise again to become a superpower of the world. Egypt, along with several other nations like Ethiopia, Nigeria, Pakistan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Angola, and Tanzania, will likely be the last large populous nations that will still be growing in the year 2100. Nigeria, for example, is projected to have a population of 730 million in the year 2100, with the potential to be a top 5 superpower on the world stage, kind of similar to what India is today. However, Nigeria has had a ton of conflict over the last 100 years or so, and it does not seem like they may be set up to take full advantage of a great economic opportunity. Nigeria still has a high poverty rate, a lack of infrastructure, a poor literacy rate, all of which are important to becoming a world superpower. However, these things could change. I mean, China was in almost the exact same situation 70 years ago and transformed things fairly quickly. However, China also had a pure authoritarian rule over their nation, and maybe Nigeria will lean into that direction and could become economically dominant. Who knows? Some of the other countries that will be growing into 2100, like Pakistan, the Congo, Ethiopia, Angola, and Tanzania, are all in a similar situation, where even though their population will continue to grow, and they may gain some power on the world stage, the odds of their economic development growing enough to become a true superpower on the world stage is still pretty low. But the one country that just may be able to take advantage of their future population growth is actually Egypt. You see, even though Egypt has a ton of problems as well, they are by many metrics in a decent spot for long-term economic prosperity. Egypt, for example, has a similar access to electricity and water as the developed world. Their GDP per capita has been rising at a good pace for the last several decades. Egypt's youth literacy rate is nearly the same as the developed Western world, and they rank high in the Human Development Index category according to the United Nations. Now, the poverty rate in Egypt is still not good, as it currently stands at 29%. However, that number is amongst the best in Africa and is comparable to some poor European nations like Albania. But one thing that might put Egypt back into a position of being a global superpower is that it has been executing a plan to become a more prosperous nation under an authoritarian ruler. The plan is called Egypt Vision 2030. It was a plan that was created in the year 2016, and it consists of sweeping economic reforms that some have said could provide an extreme benefit to economic growth, while others have said that the return on investment will be poor for this plan, and the reforms may be a waste of resources. But as of right now, here's what's happening. The first part of the plan has been massive investments towards the most impoverished parts of Egypt. These investments started in 2019 and, according to the United Nations, have provided a significant increase in the standard of living for millions of Egyptians in those areas. The investments came in the form of housing, medical and educational services, and general infrastructure investments. The second part of the plan is a project that you may have heard of. Egypt is building a new capital city about 45 kilometers east of its current capital of Cairo. The construction of this new city has been well underway for about 7 years now, and several mega projects within the city are already nearing completion. For example, the iconic tower, which is the tower's name, might actually be completed by the time that this video comes out. It is already the tallest tower in Africa and one of the tallest buildings in the world. There is also essentially an entire district that is already finished, but the entire project will need a few more years before the entire city can be officially up and running. The city is also being built as a smart city with a highly efficient financial district. This, along with the appropriate amount of hospitals, mosques, entertainment centers, and sports complexes, are already under construction, and this city may at the very least become the biggest cultural and financial hub in Africa, and maybe one of the largest in the entire world. Another part of Egypt's plan is to make it easier to do business within the nation. They are doing this by doing sweeping legal reforms and tax reforms, while simultaneously trying to make the country more attractive for foreign businesses to invest in. Now, despite all of this, Egypt at this current second in time is currently going through a rough economic period. Inflation is high, the debt is growing fast, and the general cost of living has risen. However, as you may know, this is an economic crisis that has hit every nation around the world. It's just that Egypt's is a little bit worse than what most other nations are experiencing. However, in the long term, Egypt's new economic plan could very well pay off and help bring prosperity to the country. If foreign investments continue to come in, if the government keeps trying to modernize its economy, and if Egypt's population keeps growing at a high rate like it's expected to until the year 2100, then it's very possible that Egypt could become the very last prosperous economy of this economic era. Or maybe not. You see, even though population decline tends to be correlated with a decay or even collapse of an economy, there are a few exceptions to this rule, or at the very least, there's a few ways to mitigate population decline. One example is that a few countries like Sweden, Denmark, and a few others actually incentivize becoming a parent. They do this by offering things like 16-month parental leave, which is split between the parents. Singapore offers a baby bonus that gives you $8,000 cash for having your first 2 kids and $10,000 for each kid afterwards. Other ways countries have been mitigating population decline is by raising the retirement age so that they maintain a larger workforce and need less money for elder care. They encourage more people to join the workforce who are not looking for work. And this could be a whole video in itself, but essentially unemployment numbers keep getting fudged in the Western world, and in reality there's substantially less young men in the workforce than there was 60 years ago. In fact, the labor force participation rate of young men was 96% just 60 years ago, and today it's about 80%. Despite all of this, there's one thought that may keep some people up at night. Some of you watching this might be alive for when humanity reaches its peak, in both population and prosperity. You see, the effect of population decline is actually a positive feedback loop, meaning that the more the population declines, the faster it will decline in the future. So what will humanity look like in 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years? Will we even be here? Will we have fused with robotics and become immortal? Will conscious robots overtake the human population, and will humans just die out? Maybe one day, in the far future, some conscious organism or machine may stumble upon the ruins of humanity and wonder what happened here. All of our wars, technological breakthroughs, our buildings, our culture may just become a story or a myth about a species who made themselves go extinct. Thanks for watching. Make sure to check out my documentaries playlist if you like this video, because I have a ton of other videos just like this on that playlist. So make sure to click on that, and I will see you guys in my next video in just a few seconds.